Welcome back to Empowerment Radio. We are talking about OCD, obsessive compulsive behaviors, what they can mean, where they come from, what we can do to unobsessify ourselves, and also, of course, is there something that we may eventually learn and grow from? Because, when I look at my own story, in some ways, as most emotions, they can be wonderful teachers and catalysts for growth. Now, if you have any questions, and I can imagine many of you have, call in 888-418-6890, 888-418-6890, or you can also leave a message on the chat box at Transformation Talk Radio on the Playing Live show, which is this show right now. In any case, so my story was starting when I was fairly young, like around 10 years old. And it was kind of a bizarre behavior because it really began with almost like a trigger by someone that I didn't even know. Now, my parents, I have to say, were anxious people. And of course, when your parents are anxious, you become anxious as well. As a child, somehow you pick it up and somehow you're feeling like, well, if these people are a little scared, in this case it was about politics, Middle East, some tension over there, potentially Third World War III coming up. And so all of this stuff was in their minds, and in my mind was just like the sky is falling and something bad's going to happen. But I could fairly hold it together until one day there was this guy who came to the house to tune the piano that my sister and I had to play on. I say had because it wasn't really joy for me at that time. And so he tuned it and he talked with me about what he was doing, and I was always a curious kid, so I was fascinated, and he told me about his perfect pitch and that he was able to just by hearing, he was able to say if this is in tune or out of tune. Totally impressive. Now, at some point, he looked at me and said, "So, young man, do you believe in God?" Well, that's kind of an odd question, right? But I knew that the right answer would be, yes, of course. So I said that, yes, of course. And he said, well, that's good. Now, you need to know that God will test you one day to test your faith. Well, that was a scary thought, because I thought, okay, I already have to deal with tests in schools and my parents are not always happy with me anyhow. Now there is God also trying to test me. That really got me thinking, and it got me feeling more and more that the shoe will drop any time now. It is about to happen. And this powerlessness, this feeling of what do I need to do to somehow prevent this from happening, to keep my parents safe, to make sure that God doesn't punish me, to maybe make sure that God's going to overlook me and not notice me. What do I need to do? And what I basically started to do was the natural thing, right? Straightening carpets. I went through the house and made sure that all the carpets were straight, because for some reason in my little mind, that seemed to be the best way to prevent World War III, the best way for me to somehow not get struck by lightning. Now, plus, for good measures, I also started to pray about 100 times. I didn't even know what I was praying, but I just thought, okay, I'm just gonna keep the line open to this God. Seems to be kind of a rather judgmental dude, so I want to make sure that he likes me, or I thought he or she. I just prayed. And, it was one of those things I couldn't stop. For several years, I was trapped. I was trapped in this feeling I have to. I have, before I go to bed, go through the house again. I have to just randomly, when I felt anxious, do my little prayers. And you can imagine it affects you. You can imagine it really keeps you more and more in that place of conditional survival. You cannot feel that, oh, I can just be open and enjoy life. You need to work for it. You need to do something for it. You need to do something to gain a sense of control. Now, at one point, a friend of mine told me, well, you know what? You're a good person. I like you. And she was totally different than me, I have to say. And that was maybe because why I trusted her, because I knew that she just was kind of way cooler than me and way beyond me. So she took me under her wings and said, you're a good person. And if there is a God, which I'm not sure, but if there is a God, I'm sure that God loves you. And you shouldn't worry about it because, your parents love you. They take care of you. They want the best for you. So why shouldn't God do the same? Well, that was a little light bulb moment for me. That was like a sense of, maybe I can actually trust. Maybe I'm not totally responsible for my parents. Maybe I can actually stop or at least let go gradually some of this behavior. And it didn't happen overnight. It certainly wasn't something that I felt like, I could immediately change. But what happened inside was just that I was able to ease up a little bit. And I think over maybe the course of a year or so, I was just outgrowing it. I could let it go. It wasn't therapy or something like this because I couldn't really talk with my parents about it, and I don't think that they would have really understood it. And at that time, I don't know that really anyone was so clear on how to help a little boy who had these obsessive compulsive patterns. So for some reason, I got that friend that really helped me to be a catalyst for change. So what did I learn from this time? And I think there are a few things I learned. One thing I learned is certainly that even though this behavior really was totally irrational, there was still some intention behind it. And this intention was ultimately to give me a sense of I can do something. Even though somehow I knew it will not make a difference. But my subconscious thought, okay, you can do something to feel at least a little bit in control when everything else feels so powerless in your life, or when you feel so powerless about everything else in your life. Now, the second thing I learned was that I do feel that, this whole anxiety of my parents and this message of this guy and my confusion about my beliefs certainly had an impact. And that was, the limiting beliefs of maybe not being safe in the world, the limiting belief of being responsible for others, the limiting belief of maybe fundamentally not being good enough or not being lovable. And it really taught me that limiting beliefs are incredibly powerful. Now, at that time, I didn't connect the dots, but later in life, looking back, it just confirmed that our reality, how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we go through our lives, is largely dependent on our beliefs, largely dependent on what we really on a core level, is how we on a core level filter all these reality information bits that we could let in, but many of them stay out. So if I had a belief of not being safe, of course, I was looking for subconsciously anything that was confirming this. Now, limiting beliefs are very, very powerful. Often we don't even know that we have them, but we are living under their spell. And one thing I learned is that it's really important to look at your beliefs, check on them, and then also revise them regularly, because we do grow out limiting beliefs. They are not like, okay, you're stuck with them for the rest of your life, like you're stuck with your DNA. No, these beliefs are flexible and they should be able to be changed like a pair of shoes. At some point they get too tight and they actually hurt, and so we have to find some new ones that fit much better. And of course I learned that straightening carpets doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't really keep the world going, and we just have to really see those behaviors, these OCD behaviors, as more metaphorical than that, what they on first glance are appearing to do for us. Now that brings me to, certain patterns. The patterns of the behaviors and what they may say about our beliefs, those limiting beliefs that I was mentioning. So for example, let's say you have a pattern of hand washing. You wash your hands all the time. You're, feeling afraid of germs. You're just, grossed out every time you have to go to a public toilet. And what does that mean? What is that OCD pattern behind it? And you could say, well, it's probably a feeling of not being safe. Now, not only being safe in the world, feeling attacked by the unknown, but also not being safe with yourself. Feeling that you cannot really trust your body, you cannot really trust your immune system, you feel like you have to be in control. And many people that have that pattern may feel that they have, also a little hypochondriac tendency, that they have this distrust in their body, in their health already in other areas as well. Now, what about that locking, that feeling of locking the door several times, or that feeling of, not being able to leave the house because, you don't know if the iron is still plugged in or not. That also has certainly a sense of not feeling safe, but it may be a different feeling. A client of mine who was really all her life feeling victimized, all her life struggling. She had very, unfortunate events happening, got fired several times, not because there was something wrong with her, but because of some political shenanigans that were going on. She started to work on a PhD in a college, and then also some really bizarre circumstance with some person who obviously was deranged also kind of made her have to give up and leave that. And on top of it, she felt very alone, and she felt very unlovable and very much without a firm place in her life. And I think for her, the locking of the door had a lot to do with this locking herself away from the world, locking the world out from her place. It's like her home became her sanctuary. It became the only safe place where she could somehow hide out, and not wanting to have the world enter into that little safe haven, not to let it in. It was really important for her to lock the door over and over again. But metaphorically, it was also a sign of her just not feeling belonging in the world, not feeling that there is a place for her besides her little home that she had to keep safe. And so it was not only this separation and this locking out, but it was also this difficulty to enter into the world, and just taking her time until she just gave up and stayed at home, which may have been a subconscious, quote unquote, secondary intention or benefit of what she was doing. Now, when we come back from the break, we'll talk more about those metaphorical meanings and patterns, and how their interpretation can help you to identify and see more the root causes where this all comes from, and the beliefs that keep you stuck in that pattern and in that interpretation, personal interpretation of your reality. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.